Dean, thank you very much. And thanks to all of you for making the effort to come. And as he described, for all the support that so many of you gave to Urban Squash, and I'm going to take you through all of that. But this is how I walked not almost, I walked every single day. Backpack a little heavier than it is now, but with water on one side. And as I'm going to tell you, I'm a diabetic for the last 30 years, and my trusty Coca-Cola over here that I used here and used on the Camino at a lot of times. So I'm going to take you through today. I'm going to start by explaining the Camino and what it is. And many of you have maybe heard about it, but I'm going to give you the details of how it all came to be. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about my experience and what I did on the Camino. But really, my major purpose today is to do two things with all of you. For those of you who have not seen this movie I'm going to talk to you about, which is what explained the Camino to me, The Way, I want you all to make an effort to watch the movie. And as well, I want you to consider walking the Camino. You don't have to do what I did, which is to walk the entire distance. You can do 100 kilometers, you can do 50. There's many ways to skin this cat, and I'm hoping that today's presentation is going to give all of you the opportunity to consider walking this remarkable journey. So first is, may I ask anybody here who's actually walked the Camino de Santiago? Can you just raise your hands? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So a number of these people, this lady here I met on the Camino, and a number of these who put their hands up helped me before I went on the journey, and I'm going to explain that to you. Is there anybody who is interested in walking and learning about this and going on the Camino? That's great. So hopefully this is going to help and give you an idea of what it's all about. So this was really my inspiration, and my wife and I, 3 years ago, we're great moviegoers, and over the holiday season we see lots and lots of movies, Lorna and I, and this was sort of the last movie. I wasn't that interested in it, and it was sort of the end of January, and it had shown for the first time at the Toronto Film Festival that fall. And it stars Martin Sheen. It's a fictional movie, and I'm going to show you a 2-minute excerpt of the movie right now. And what this excerpt is, Martin Sheen has learned that his son, who has gone to walk the Camino, has been killed in a storm. And he is now meeting with the policeman, having identified his son's remains. And the policeman tells him what the Camino is. It's a 2-minute excerpt, but I just thought it gives you a great feeling for the film and an overview of what the Camino is. Now, I'm going to get into a little bit more detail, but I thought it would be worthwhile for you simply to see this little 2-minute excerpt. And here we go.
These are Daniel's belongings. Merci. This is everything he had when we found him.
What happened?
It was an accident. The weather in the Pyrenees is famous for being unpredictable, and I'm sure Daniel would have been warned by the locals. You're not close with him?
Not since his mother died, I'm sorry to say. What was he doing out there?
He was on pilgrimage on the Camino, walking the road to Santiago de Compostela. People from very different backgrounds, faith, and generations have walked the path from here in the French Pyrenees to Santiago de Compostela. 800 kilometers on the northwestern coast of Spain for over 1,000 years. We believers are told that the remains of St. James, the apostle of Jesus, are interned there. And so we make pilgrimage. This is what your son Daniel was doing.
Why was he alone?
Many people choose to make the trek alone. The way is a very personal journey, Mr. Avery. This is the shell, a symbol of the pilgrim making the journey. And this is Daniel's passport for the Camino. It is to be officially stamped at every important stop along the route through Spain. And the first stamp is here, in Saint-Jean.
Buen camino.
Merci.
When you arrive at the end, the passport should look like this. I have walked the Camino to the Atlantic Ocean 3 times, there and back. I will do it once more on my 70th birthday. God willing, of course.
Daniel was my only child.
We can also offer cremation, if that is a more suitable way for you to transport the remains back home.
So it was such a touching thing, and it's almost a coming of an age of a 60-year-old man and the pain that he had gone through. He then decides, rather than burying his son and taking him back to California, that he is going to actually walk the Camino, taking his son's remains after having him cremated. And it's a very touching film, and as I said, what's caused me. So firstly, what is the Camino? And as he spoke about that, this goes back 1,200 years. And it actually comes from all over Europe. I'm going to explain how it all happened, but you can see there are many, many, many routes. But the most significant routes are through Spain to Santiago, which is up there. That is Santiago right there. And we start over there in Saint Jean. And you walk that. So, and this is now, and I'm going to refer back to this on a number of occasions just to show you where I am. But you start in Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port in France. The first day is over the Pyrenees, and you walk then to Santiago. In my case, I walked another 100 kilometers to Finisterre on the ocean. So for me, I said it was 1,000 kilometers. It was a fancier number, but it was only 920 kilometers. Sorry. I did the best I could. So why did I do this? And I sort of thought, firstly, you know, I was 62 years old. I've been somebody, those of you who know me, who has been contemplating my navel for most of my 62 years. And I thought that as I was entering, God willing, my last third, that this was a great time in my life to sort of go out and do this. It was obviously a great sense of adventure. I've never really, not much of a hiker. I've never really done this of any length before. And thirdly, I do have a faith. And I wanted to go out. I was raised a Christian. I must say that over my time, I have not come to believe in the divinity of Jesus Christ, but I'm still a man of faith. And I thought that this would be an interesting experience. As I said to many people, you know, God talked to Moses when he was out walking in the wilderness, and I thought maybe he talked to me. Unfortunately, he didn't, and many of my friends suggested that maybe I'm not Moses, which was a fair point. But that was really my motivation for doing this. Then all of a sudden, and I had done this as a personal journey, a member of this club, Winston Siegel, made a suggestion to Lorna, my wife, that I should do this for charity. And as many of you know, I am the chairman of Urban Squash Toronto that Dean spoke about. It's a program that began 20 years ago in Boston. We had a huge 20th anniversary in New York City to help kids in difficult environments with their education, mentoring them in their life, and helping and using squash as a vehicle to do it. And so that is, through your generosity, how we raised $115,000 for this Camino. Shivani Ruparel, who is here and is our executive director. Shivani, where are you, if I can, just over there in the corner. And the problem with all these charities is they're an ongoing thing. It's about $5,000 a child. We have about 70 students now working with us. So this is also a fundraiser to, if not today, in the long term. It's a great program that we have. And then Darcy Wafers is my assistant. She was a huge help. And my very old friend, although you wouldn't know that he was a friend, he's so mean to me, but Tim Griffin over here on my left, he made a really significant pledge to raise $25,000 to help on this cause, and he was a huge help throughout our fundraising efforts. So this is just the classroom that we have, and this takes place, Urban Squash, up in the National Squash Academy up in the Downsview Park, which is very close to the Jane Finch corridor, which is where we get our students from. I want to also thank these people. The first guy is Tom Hichman, and Tom is in the back. Tom, if you would just raise your hand. Tom has done this on 2 separate occasions, and he's an adventurer. He's a crazy adventurer. And I met Tom about 3-4 years ago and learned that he had done the Camino, and he was the start for me. The book that I put on each table, which is, I'd like it back for God's sakes when you're finished with it, but we had lunch together and he brought me the book. And ever since, whenever I meet anybody who is considering doing this, I sort of feel that I'm paying it forward to you, Tom, and I always give people this book. And it was my Bible on the Camino, and the reason I put them on the table is just to show you, it's just an overview of what to do, but every single stage as recommended is in the book. Tom then took me to Mountain Equipment Co-op for about 2 hours and helped me buy things. I don't know what the hell to buy. And as I said, I don't hike. And the most important thing that he helped me with was the right shoes. And I started wearing them about 8 months before I went, so they were broken in and really helped me. Susan Chapman, who's not here today, is the wife of a member and the mother of an ex-member. And she did this herself, but she did it a little differently. She decided she was going to do it like it was the 14th century. And she just was toughed it out the whole way. Rocco Rossi, who is in the back. Rocco, as you may remember, ran for mayor a number of years ago and has been the head of the Heart and Stroke Foundation as we first met, and the Prostate Cancer Foundation now. And he has been out on the Camino 7 times, and in many cases to raise money for charity. And he also sat down with me and brought me maps and things and was just so helpful in what I should do and how I should do it. He, though, kind of made a major screw up for me. Rocco suggested that I don't walk the beginning, because the first day, as you see, over the Pyrenees is brutal. It's the hardest of all. And he said, I'd walk the last 100 kilometers because it's a nicer trip and it's not so brutal. I know so many people who walk that first and they don't finish it. It's hurt them so much. I told that to Tom, and Tom thought I was just a suck. Are you kidding? You got to walk the first part. So now I was walking the first and the further 100, which caused me to go to the ocean to finish there. But I thank both of these men so much. And Geary McGrath, a member of the club, and I'm going to explain his help in a little while. Geary has done this a number of times himself, and I'm going to go through that in a second. So who is St. James? He's the patron saint of Spain. He is one of the 12 disciples. After the death of Christ, he goes to Spain, Iberia, to preach. Doesn't have a lot of success. And so he goes back to Jerusalem, and King Herod in 44 AD cuts his head off. His disciples and followers decide to take those remains, run out to Spain, Iberia, bury them, and in 820 AD, a shepherd finds these remains, and a priest goes, definitely St. James. So they build a chapel over those remains, and this begins the pilgrimage to Santiago in honor of St. James. These are the remains of St. James to be found under the altar in the cathedral at Santiago. Part of the history is, it's an interesting thing. The Moors, and as you would know, the early terminology for Muslims was Moors. So the Moors were dominating Spain at this point. They were the dominant community. Is it 1-0? No E. Oh, so sorry. Jesus. See, it's a suit, guys. Jesus. Oh, Christ. So, so the truth is, this was also very much even a political thing in trying to draw Christians back by the Catholics. And they set up groups to the Knights Templar to protect those Christians coming to Santiago. And there were, at the point of the 12th and 13th century, there were over 250,000 Christians or Catholics walking the Camino, which is about what the number is today. So it was a huge, huge part of history. It started to fall a little bit into disrepute or disrepair as the Protestant community started to come in the 15th and 16th century with both the Church of England and Lutheranism. And it started to slow down. The last 30 years, it's really been reborn, and it's been reborn by the Catholic Church and the state, who have tried to encourage this, and there are now large numbers doing it. As you see, $215,000, 45% women, 55% men. Most do it on foot, but an awful lot do it on a bike as well. The history, Main Pilgrims follows a Roman trade route, so it's a fascinating thing to be walking this route. You're on trails, you're on roadways, but this is a route that goes back almost, route by route from the old ancient times of the Roman Empire. Two documents that you saw from the short film. The first is this document, which is a passport. You can get them anywhere in the world, but I picked mine up when I first got to Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port, and as you saw on the thing, you get this stamp. You can get it stamped anywhere, at a restaurant, in a hotel, I think bookstores. Everybody has a stamp, and you present this at the very end of your journey to the Pilgrims Office in Santiago, and you receive this Latin document that goes back 1,200 years, confirming that you have completed the Camino de Santiago. You do not have to walk the entire Camino of 820 kilometers. You can just walk the last 100, and it allows you to receive this Compostela. Pilgrim's passport, as I just showed you. This also, with this passport, gets you into less expensive accommodation, which I'm going to explain to you, and confirming your pilgrimage. This is the best part, and I felt... Now, to be honest with you, I'm a bit offended by the humor, because I thought there's an aura that you could see when I got back. All of my sins have been forgiven, and unlike the rest of you, other than a few of us, I'm going straight to heaven. But that truly is the thinking and what people have been promised by the Catholic Church if they walk the Camino de Santiago. One of the things that surprised me when I arrived, and I left on a Labor Day Monday and started walking. I went to, I'll show you in a moment where I started, but I was surprised how similar the weather felt to Toronto, to be honest with you. I thought it was going to be much, much hotter. And it's like Toronto, sort of, you hit early September, all of a sudden you feel like fall has begun. Well, it felt that way, and it was a little bit warmer during the sunshine, but it wasn't crazy hot as I expected. And you can see it's not ridiculously hot. It is northern Spain, it's not southern Spain. This is the shell, and it's unclear what it is, but you can see the cross of St. James there. And I had one, but I actually didn't put it out on my backpack, which I have now. But as time went on, I wasn't entirely comfortable calling myself a pilgrim, as I didn't relate to the Christian sensibilities of what this was. But by the end, they'd sucked me in, and I felt that I must be a pilgrim after I had done it and had this shell. And just a little bit of overview for those of you who are considering it. Signs in Spanish and English, pretty easy. The route markers are terrific, and I'll show you what they are, but it's very hard to get lost, although I did a couple of times. The different regions have different signs, and this Camino shell is all over the place. Those are the two signs, and so this is the stylized shell and this yellow arrow. This is the majority of what you see. This is all done nicely. Most of the time, they're just painted yellow signs of those things, and you just got to watch for it, whether it's on the roadway, whether it's on a tree. You're just looking for this all the time. This is the book that I mentioned to you. It was what Tom originally gave me. It was absolutely my Bible. It told you how far you were going to go each day. And one of the things that people asked me was, did I just do everything that was told? I was very nervous as I started. I didn't know what the hell I could do. So every day I had to figure out where I was going to stand, but this book would tell you where the places are and what they cost, and there would be phone numbers, and I'll tell you through how I did that. That's you can see on the left-hand side, it actually shows you all the ups and downs, the actual map, how far you're going to go and how much it's adjusted for up and downhill. There are the distances. As you can imagine, equipment, and this is where Tom was so helpful to me, but less is always better. 10% of your body weight, and I always felt it was about 20 pounds is what I carried. Use common sense. If you don't need something, trash it. Need something, buy it in the next town. There's a real community of people that are there now supporting the Camino, both medical clinics and places to stay and things to buy and places to eat. Hiking poles, don't leave home without them. As you saw, I came in, but it was an interesting experience for me. I walked the first half of the journey with these hiking poles. And one day, and I thought they were fantastic, it really helped me get a rhythm and I felt good with them. And one day I was walking through a town and I just decided I wasn't going to use them, never used them again. And so I would strongly urge anybody who wants to do it, it's worthwhile, but at the end of the day, it wasn't critical. And as I said, good worn-in boots are priceless. A lot of people have feet problems and shin problems, and I was very fortunate there, and I do think that both having these worn shoes was a big help, and as well as I think 40 years of squash and beating the crud out of my feet over all these years, and I think that helped as well. I'm a diabetic, as I mentioned earlier, so I was very concerned about, I took sugar pills, I took a thing I could inject to get my sugars up if it was a problem. I had to have enough insulin, I had to have enough blood strips. I was very nervous of this. But at the end of the day, as it is here in Toronto, my Coca-Colas were the big thing, and I didn't use the sugar pills, and I just took Coke, and that was all I needed. Electronics. This was an interesting thing that I did, and so everywhere there's Wi-Fi. They sure want you to go as purely as you can and don't take anything. Most people take something, and I ended up buying an iPhone that I'm going to explain to you in a moment. Useful things, ATMs in every town, so you don't take cash. It's just like everywhere else you go. A lot of pharmacies. Not great English fluency, but I didn't have any Spanish, and I didn't have any problems. For those who are concerned and women that are considering doing it, lots of single women out there, and really without much problems. It's a very safe environment, and everybody is looking out for everybody. I'm going to go through this at the end of the thing. This is where I started, so this is how I'm getting started. And as I mentioned my iPhone, I bought an iPhone 1 week before I went. I've been a BlackBerry guy, and I thought I've got to have an iPhone just to be able to take decent pictures. And I went and got a Spanish SIM card. So it allowed me to make all of my phone calls locally throughout Spain. I took a bus and train to Saint Jean Pied de Port to the Pilgrims Office. But this is something I really have wanted to see for a decade. That is the very famous 16-year-old Frank Geary Bilbao Guggenheim Museum. And I flew from London to Bilbao, spent 2 nights in Bilbao just specifically to see this museum. And then on the Thursday afternoon, I took a bus and then a train and arrived in St. John at about 7 o'clock. I was intending to stay in St. John for a night and for 2 nights, and I decided only one. This was the best advice I got for the whole thing, and this again was Tom. There are no rules. Make it your own. And everybody has a different approach to this thing. And there are many ways to skin this cat. As I mentioned, Susan Chapman decided she was going to do it like a 14th century pilgrim. I think she had a 10-foot cross on her back. Maybe not, but she was going to feel the pain and the suffering. But there are no rules. You can do it however you want to do it. And it was just a great, great piece of advice for me that you can adjust. And there were a few things occurred to me on the way. And then do it for yourself, which is it's really why you're doing this thing. So there's the map that I showed you before. Saint Jean, you can see right there, and that's where I start. And pretty sexy, don't you think? The arrow, then it flips. So this really was the toughest day, and this is the day that we saw at the very beginning on the film that is the hardest in the entire route. You go from sea level to about 4,500 feet. You're 32 kilometers adjusted for the elevation, and it's straight over the Pyrenees. For me, I was really nervous about this. It was being my first day. There was not much out there. And I would say half of my route I did on roads. I did not go straight over the mountains. And after a while, and I felt comfortable, there were routes into it, which I did. But it was it was an incredible day walking over this thing. I was out there for about 8 hours. And my next stop becomes, I'm now in Spain, in Roncesvalles. And it's not really a town. It's a little hut for pilgrims. And Roncesvalles is a very famous town for a battle that one of you two guys are going to know. What was the battle that was in Roncesvalles? Death of Roland, the Charlemagne's rear guard. I told you, he would know. But today, it's barely a town. It's just a place. There's a chapel, a church. There are places to stay, fundamentally for pilgrims. And this was the next day. And this is the most depressing thing you can imagine. You've just walked your arse off. You're exhausted. Your feet hurt. And you get this sign about 100 kilometers or 100 yards out of Roncesvalles, 790 kilometers. Oh, swell. Well, that is such a great idea. But that's the first thing you see. And it was, you know, it's intimidating of what you've now got in front of you. The next stop, or there was 2 days later, so I left on a Friday, got to Roncesvalles Friday night, and then the next day, one more road trip to go, and then on the Sunday, I arrive in Pamplona. And Pamplona, Spain, is the very famous town where they run the bulls every year. And I tried to get there early, and I was able to get there at about 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and I spent the entire afternoon in the main square of Pamplona. And it was really one of the great things about this walk is that I liked when I arrived in my destination, I would often go to the main square. If I've had a long walk, it's always a beer, always a sandwich. I'm eating like a horse, try not to lose weight. And Pamplona was just a fantastic town. Just some of the running of the bulls. And now I'm leaving Pamplona the next morning. And this is where one of the roadways or streets that they run the bulls. This next day is another brutal climb for about 3 or 4 hours. Halfway up this climb to the top of the mountain, the hill, I met these two ladies, Stella and Karen. And I met at least 15 people that I have still been in touch with since I have returned. And I'll show you a picture of a couple of young ladies that one of whom I met 3 weeks ago with my daughter and my wife in New York. Hadn't seen her for 16 months. These two are originally from Rhodesia, she kept saying, and now both of them live in California. So that's the Alto de Perdón, and that's at the very top of this hill that was, you know, I kept saying, it's almost over, it's almost over. It just never seemed to be bloody over. But this is a very famous stainless steel statue that celebrates the pilgrims and their journey across the Camino. This is just a picture so you can see we're very elevated. And I'm now developing a routine. So I'm trying to get out by 7:30, 7:45. It's not that dark in the morning, but it still takes some time for the light to come. I'm eating breakfast, I'm having a snack, I'm having a lunch and dinner, and I'm really making a big effort. I've always been relatively slender, and I sure didn't want to lose 20 pounds, which I thought was possible. So I was doing my best to eat 4 meals a day, and often in a pilgrim's dinner that I'm going to explain to you, they'll offer you 3 courses. I often would have 4. And so I'm just doing everything I can, and funnily enough, much to my surprise, I did not lose any weight when I got back from this. Shoes off whenever possible. This is something that people taught me. So whenever I stopped, off my shoes would come, let them dry, let the feet go. And the pilgrim's dinner I'm going to explain, and then I'd read and blog and go to bed. And I did, I think, about 5 or 6 blogs to everybody and really trying to support the efforts that we were making for urban squash. And Darcy helped me here. One of the great things that I learned about this fabulous iPhone is that I could talk into it. It was just the best. So I was able to do a lot of it. I sent her the pictures, and then she would send them out. This is a wine tap for pilgrims, extended by a winery, a local regional winery. And they've got little cups there, and you go and have a glass of wine, and off you go. Lots of variations of how to stay anywhere. There are 5-star hotels, although not too many of those. They could be hikes staying in the hotels or pilgrims' lodgings. And they're generally right on the Camino, although in a couple of cases we'd be picked up and taken them a kilometer, 2 or 3, to a local farm where they would take care of you and then drive you back the next morning. There are hotels, pensions. Have I lost you? Okay, that's good. So these are what most people do. The refugios, generally related to the church. Albergues, which are the main staying place of pilgrims. And there are 2 types. There's a municipal albergue, which is a first come, first serve. You can't book them. Not bad, and they're only about €6 a night, and slightly better, and some you can pre-book, about €10 a night. And as I mentioned, I just made the decision that, again with Tom's, there are no rules, that although this was by far the majority of people did the albergues, I just decided at 62, I snore like a trooper, I have to go to the bathroom at least 25 times a night, that I just was not going to do that. And I ended up staying in $35, $40 euro accommodations most nights, which half of the time would include breakfast. There's the albergue. So you could see the municipals, you could have 30, 40, 50, 100 people in these albergues in one room, depending on where you were. Private, slightly nicer. This is the cuisine, and generally very, very group meals provided by the location of the albergue that you're staying. Very communal environment. Oh, we've lost you. You've lost me. So I think I'm okay now, Tony. So this is the Pilgrims Meal, and everywhere you go along the Camino, you can get a Pilgrims Meal in restaurants, wherever you are. And it's sort of 8, 9, 10 euros a night. And it includes generally a salad, but generally 3 opportunities for your starter, a hot entree, again 2 or 3, and a dessert. We are going to have today the Santiago Cake, which only came to the last portion in Galicia, but was such a spectacular dessert that when I returned home on my Thanksgiving Sunday, the one thing I asked from my wife Lorna was a Santiago Cake, which she made for our Thanksgiving dinner, which she did as well as anybody did out on the Camino. It was just fantastic. A bottomless glasses of wine you can eat all to your heart's content, and it's all for about 10 euros. So it's everywhere you go along the Camino. Paella, big choice out on the Camino, obviously, Spanish meal. All these different terrains, it's not as everyone told me when I first was contemplating this. It's really a walk. It's a hike. It's not treacherous mountain climbing of any kind. The most difficult for sure is over the Pyrenees, but it's not dangerous. And you're walking a lot on dirt roads. You're even walking a fair amount of time on paved roads, but an awful lot of roads, trails as well, and a landscape. It is really, it's beautiful, and very much in many ways like Northern Ontario. It's old farmland, a lot of small farms, not a lot of people in northern Spain. The other thing that was fascinating about it, and I don't think I have anything here that I found interesting, is the amount of electric producing windmills all over northern Spain. They either the Spanish government says we're just doing it, or there's no fights as we seem to have in this part of the world about putting these things up. There again, you're just cows and goats, and they're all over the place. It's just a beautiful, beautiful walk. La Razona. So you can see now we are there and moving into Burgos, which is a beautiful, beautiful town. And Puente De La Reina, is one of my favorite little towns along the whole journey. river to the left, beautiful outdoor cafes. There was actually music that night, and it was just a beautiful, beautiful town. And pretty much everywhere you go, you're coming to a town. I don't know if anybody who saw the movie Wild, the thing with Reese Witherspoon, which was a terrific film, but my God, this woman, number one, walked 1,000 miles, not 1,000 kilometers. But you're out in the middle of nowhere. I mean, she's tenting, she's having to bring her food. It's not the case here. You're always finding places to get something to eat, get a coffee, all the way along the Camino. Just the different towns all the way through the piece. Lograno, you can see they're beautiful, beautiful things. The long, long winding road, as I like to say it. And as you get into, there are two areas. And the Meseta is sort of the middle of the journey. And it's really the prairies, the flatlands of Spain. And I must admit, I'm not one that was just walking around thinking, oh, isn't this pretty sights? Or I was just walking, I got a job to do each day and get to my sights. And it was also in that area, the Rioja region, or the winemaking region. So there was lots of great wine along the route. Santo Domingo, a beautiful town. And this is where one of the places where I started to run into trouble. I get to Belorado, and 2 stops next is going to be Burgos. And the next town that I've got to walk to out of Belorado is a very small town, and I can't get any accommodation. So the guy tells me, look, what you should do is take the bus in the morning at 7 o'clock, go to that next town, and then walk all the way to Burgos. So, you know, I'm not walking a little bit, but Tom said, make it your own, and I thought, that's okay, I can miss a bit, no big deal. I get in the bus at 7:15, and they don't stop in the little town. The son of a bitch goes all the way to Burgos. So at that point, I decide, look, I'm going to get a place to stay, put my bag down. I got in a cab and went back to that town and walked into Burgos. What was the thing that was fascinating about that experience for me is taking the 20 pounds off my back. When I started, I felt pretty good, this is good. But by the time I got to Burgos, I was still fried, and the 20 pounds didn't seem to matter a lick. But it was something that I had to do to figure it out. And just small towns along the way. Cruz De Ferro, I think I have this in the wrong place, but this is a very important part of the Camino. You take a rock with you, which I did out of Santiago, and it's a big part of the film, as you'll see, if those of you who have not seen it yet. And you carry a stone, and it symbolizes your journey, and that was me standing on top of that pile of stones and often say a prayer and one of thanks for the Camino journey. So we're now getting into Burgos. This is the most magnificent cathedral. I think this one took them 5 centuries to construct. It's really quite remarkable. My walk, as I mentioned, into Burgos was a long journey, and one of the difficult parts of it is the last 10 kilometers. You're sort of in the outskirts of town. It's mechanical. It's not that pretty, and it was just long and arduous. And I made a mistake in just that last 10 kilometers. Instead of going left, somehow I went right. It didn't cause me any negative concern about how far I walked, but what was interesting is I met these 2 people. And I ended up, as I got into Burgos, coming from that part, I sat down and give me a beer and a sandwich, and they were sitting right beside me. And we struck up a conversation. We became great friends. And when Lorna and I were back in London in June, they came to London. They live in England. They came to London and spent the night with us. And we had a wonderful, wonderful time with them, Brian and Madonna. And it was very much how this occurred on the Camino. You just met people as you went along. Santiago, Santo Domingo. This was just a celebration one afternoon for a new leader on a weekend. Beautiful town. Just this long and winding road, and that, as you can see, is on the Meseta. It's like a prairie. There we go. And that church was built in 1066. Spent the night there, not in the church, but just right beside it. And there's just churches everywhere, masses going on all the time. Now, as I was getting to Lyon, I had 2 pieces of trouble. Number one, my leg. And I thought I had broken my leg. I was in so much pain. And I walked about half a day that day, and when I got into the town, I was able to go to a clinic, and I was just diagnosed with tendonitis. I thought I was really in serious, serious trouble. But tendonitis, not so bad. He gave me 600 milligram pills of ibuprofen. I took a bus again the next day to catch up with some people that I was with. And on I went, and it was amazing how easy it was. I was shocked, and as I said, I thought I'd broken my leg. I was in so much pain. And then I ran into some accommodation problems again. What I kept hearing along the Camino was the closer you get to Santiago, the worse it gets. Because people are not always walking the whole thing, they join in, and I started to get very concerned. And when I got to just before Burgos, again, I couldn't get a place to stay. So I reached out to Geary, and Geary, if you could just raise your hand, and Geary McGrath. And he had said, if you ever have any problems, I got a guy that can help you. Trust me. So I emailed him, and he sent me back. And I emailed this guy, Gary Budden, and you have a business card on your table. And he runs a company called Spanish Adventures. And he helps people. He decided he's a PhD in weather. He's an Australian, got a PhD from Oxford, and 15 years ago decided, I want to live outside. I don't want to be doing the damn weather. I want to live outside. And he decided this is going to be an interesting, growing thing, the Camino de Santiago, and he has been working the Camino ever since. So I contacted him after Geary got back to me, and funnily enough, he was going to be in Lyon the night I was arriving. So I met him outside of the cathedral in Lyon, and bought him dinner, and he said, look, I'll help you. I'll just take care of everything for you. And he sat on the phone as we were doing it. It's Geary, Clive, C-L-I-V-E, no credit cards, no nothing, and he booked me to the end. And it was just a huge help. I hadn't done that before. I don't know if I would have had the troubles getting accommodation afterwards, but he just made it all so simple. I've been in touch with him a lot over the last year and a half with Geary's support, and anybody who ever wants to go out on the Camino, he is a great, great source of help. So there is Lyon, and it's a large town, and as we were talking, it's about 350 kilometers, 315 kilometers from Santiago. This would also be a great place to start if you wanted to just go from there. This is the cathedral in Lyon, which is just magnificent. And again, these cathedrals is where generally your central square would be. So I love going to these central squares and having dinner and just hanging out with people, there are lots of pilgrims and lots of locals, and getting an understanding of the local environment. This movie is this is a hotel for pilgrims, built I think in the 15th or 16th century. And it's a Pomodor, which is a group of old either hotels and or buildings that were refurbished by the Spanish government. And this plays a major role in the film The Way, and I was hell-bent and determined that I was going to stay there for a night. It was about 120 euros for the night, and was really a fabulous experience to stay in this property. Yes? Oh yeah, sorry. Paradors. So I guess it's not, again, another... Why do you guys criticize my spelling, for God's sakes? It's just... Both Catholics, too. You're both Catholics, right? See, they're all the same. But guilt. Yeah. Another couple that I had dinner with out of Lyon, two couples, Patrick and Catherine, Peter and Jean. Lorna and I took a train from London to Newcastle, 3-hour train ride in June, spent the night in one of their homes and they were in their mid-70s. They walked the entire Camino de Santiago. The last 100 kilometers, they were met by a priest, a minister, and a friend who walked the last 100 kilometers with them, and then their families joined them to celebrate their completion of this Camino. It was such an emotional thing, and I made a big effort to be there on the Friday night to celebrate with them, which I was able to do in Santiago. So Sarria. When I finished the Camino, I sort of felt this was it for me. I was done. I had been walking. I don't need any more of this. Now that I've come back, I'm going to go again. And My daughter is someone who has some challenges walking, and she is determined that she is going to come with me and walk the Camino. And the hope is that we're going to do this out of Sarria. It's about 115 kilometers. I think it'll take her about 10 days. And we'll walk from there and into Santiago. But again, for those of you that have an interest, it's a great place to start. It's a lovely little town. There's lots of restaurants and things, and it's a great way to start. And you do this in 5 days. Just walk into Barrie, no big deal. They do. Right. Way to do it. It really is, and it really gives you a sense of it. Tony, oh, there we go. Again, an incredible church history throughout this area, as we're now getting close to all these churches. It's hard not to be sucked into it all, even though So we're now getting to Santiago. Something happened for me. This gentleman who helped me out of Lyon, Geary, one of the things he said to me, on your second last day, I want you to walk much further than you normally would by the book, because I want you to get to Santiago for the Pilgrims Mass at noon. So I walked probably 35, 36 kilometers on that second last day so that I could get up. Much to my shock and surprise, to be honest with you, it was really one of the most emotional days of my life. Both finishing the work in the Camino was a lot. When I got to Santiago, the people that you saw that you'd seen a month before, a week before, and the celebration of all of us as we're hugging, and it was really something else. And so getting into Santiago, so special. It was just so emotional for me. This is the cathedral. The first thing you do is you go to the Pilgrims Office, which is right below the cathedral, and it's in that you go and get interviewed by someone who confirms that you have walked it, and he writes out the Compostela document for you, and off you go on your way. There's a certificate. I thought a very attractive picture myself. And these were the two young ladies that I met. They just graduated from Colby College. They were, I think, 22 or 23 at the time, Rosie and Leah. And as I said, the one on the left I saw in New York for the first time after 16 months, having not seen her, and my daughter and my wife and Brian, her significant other. We had dinner with her and had a wonderful, wonderful night. And I'll be in touch with these people all my life. I've lost you, Tony. There we go. Just more friends. All these communal meals, just all the time. Now, the Pilgrims Mass. Now, the botafumario is an incense burning item that you see in the film. It's only done about half the time. Sometimes at a Pilgrim's Mass you see it, sometimes you don't. As a non-religious person, a non-Christian or relate to our modern religions, but being a man of faith, I ended up going to 3 masses in the time that I was there. For those of you who know this, I don't want to be sacrilegious, so I like to go up to see the priest, but I don't take the sacrament because I know that there could be lightning and thunder. So I get a blessing. And as many of you who may have read my blog, one of the great disappointments, I had a great friend that I met on the Camino who was from Toronto, an Israeli. And I hadn't seen him for a few days. And as I'm going up to get my blessing, he reaches out to me to say hello. And I to this day, I regret that I didn't grab him. Come with me, we'll just get a blessing. And funnily, I said lunch. He was the first gentleman that I saw when I got back, and I told him how upset I was that I didn't ask him to join me. He said, you should have, I would have gone. But there's 1,000, 1,200 people in this church, and they're there for Mass. It's an hour-long Mass. But in this, I'm going to show you now what the video that I took. It's no more than 30 seconds of this incense and how they do it. It's really something. this is, as you'll see here, this is my doing this, and this is burning incense that 6 men are pulling, and 1 woman, 1 nun, singing. It's quite moving. It's really quite an experience to go through that. This is the Mass, and this is where the men down below are pulling and now leaving Santiago. So again, thanks to Rocky, my final walk, the last 100 kilometers out of Santiago to Finisterre. And you don't see it here, but it is, Finisterre in Spanish is end of the earth. And that's what this was considered to be in ancient times, is the end of the earth. So that's what you get to. And there's a lighthouse there, and everyone goes. It's a big part of this, those who come this far, and most don't, but a lot of people do. There's an amazing sunset. And this says, excuse me, this is 0.00 kilometers at the bottom. So that's the Camino. This was the adventure of a lifetime for me. I'm amazed, to be honest with you, the resonance that it's had in my mind, how often I think of it, how often people ask me about it, all the time. I'm often having lunches, and I think those of us that have done the Camino feel very much the same way. They want to help others who are considering doing it. It's an amazing journey, no matter your faith, your anything about your background. It's an adventure, but there is a spirituality to it. The people that you meet from all over the world, and it's something that I would strongly encourage you to give consideration to. And even if you don't do the Camino, make sure you watch the movie, The Way. I also would finally, as I have been doing all the way through this show and what I do, is continue to thank you and continue to ask you for your support of Urban Squash. It's a wonderful program for these kids. We've been going now for 4 years under Shivani's leadership, and we're continuing to grow and continuing to make a real impact on these kids. We're a budget of almost $300,000 a year right now, and so any support that you can give us would be much appreciated. I'm happy to answer any questions. We've got dessert. The Santiago Cake is still to come, but I thank you all so much for coming out and letting me share with you my Camino experience. Thank you.